G'day and welcome to episode 14 of DJF Live. On today's show, I want to take a look at the Canon EF lenses and the changeover to the RF lenses, because for probably 13 years now, I've been investing in the EF lens mount system. And so with the introduction of the RF mount system a couple of years ago, that sort of changed my approach to video and photography. So for myself, I do both video and photography, probably about 70% video and 30% photography. And so it meant with the introduction of the 5D Mark II, which you're probably very familiar with back in 2008, which I got in 2009, that sort of changed my approach to the equipment that I was purchasing. So it meant that I could sort of consolidate my lenses to a large degree, so that for sort of smaller corporate stuff, I could be shooting with the Canon photography lenses. And then for bigger shoots, we could rent lenses or just like whole different camera bodies as well. So it was a really neat way to not have so much gear or have like a complete video set and a photography set, but to sort of consolidate that both on cost, but also when you're traveling. It's something you got to bear in mind about the amount of gear that you're taking, either on like a travel shoot on an airplane or even just around town. The more gear that you bring, the more batteries and cards and all that kind of different support structure that you need to support the different types of gear that you're using. So before we start, I just want to take a little trip down memory lane, and we can take a look back at some of my very first cameras that I was using way back in, I think, 2002. So this was my TRV 900, which was a Sony 3CCD. That's kind of what it made it professional back in the day, was that it had that prism which would separate the light into three chips, which was red, green, and blue, and it would have better color rendition. And even though it was just like a DV tape, and now we would look at that and say it's very subpar quality, back in 2002, that was like sort of like minimum broadcast level. Like you could, I think you could sort of get away with it being broadcast, even though it's not, obviously like the full professional broadcast camera. But that was my very first camera that I purchased as in my late teenage years, I think, something like that, which I took off to university with me, and I shot a ton of projects on that as I went through film school. And that was really what got me going. Let me see if I can bring up this and go through here. So remember, you got the whole DV cassette tape, and I ended up with like hundreds of DV cassette tapes throughout my career as I got going in sort of 2002, 3, and then 4. In about 2004, I went traveling and I bought a little Ixus 400, and that just so I could get some snapshots as I was traveling around the world doing the gap year that the Aussies do. And I mean, if you look at this way back then, look at that screen. That was tiny, tiny little screen to see what you've been shooting on. Interesting to see here that it's a compact flash card still. So yeah, it's it's come a long way since then, and this did shoot videos and photos, but certainly the videos were probably like 320 sort of resolution. So it wasn't something that we would think as like something you could use in a broadcast capacity. But it was, for me, it was the camera that helped me bridge the gap between video and photography. And as I started going around the world, this is me in Times Square in 2005. I have no idea what's going on with the glasses here. Maybe it's a hangover from The Matrix. I don't remember. I wouldn't advocate for that style now. But this is back in 2005, and this is sort of image quality that we were getting straight out of that little point and shoot camera. This is top of the Empire State Building on a plane. You can see, and I was trying to find a shot this morning with that in the shot, and it's the best one that I could find. So I've just pulled together a few images of Toronto. Under the right conditions, you can get decent shots out of most cameras. Like an iPhone, you can, under the right lighting conditions, you can get a great shot. This was one that just turned out well, but it's not obviously a reliable camera to do that all the time. I think these shots are a little bit out of order, jumping around between like London and Africa, and back to Niagara Falls, and just New York again, 2005, with no World Trade Center there, interestingly. So like this image, for example, I think I shot this one on JPEG, and the colors are a bit crunched, as you can see from whatever post-production has been done on this many, many years ago. So there's not a whole lot that you can do in terms of post-production there. Then when I got back to Australia, this is around about 2005, I was like, I need to get a proper DSLR camera, which I think probably for around about $1,000. I think in the US it might have been called a Rebel or something. In Australia it was a 350D, and that was my first, I think it was 8 megapixel camera, something like that, with a kit lens, and that just kind of got me a little more into the professional photography side of things to some degree. This is a selfie with that camera at the Museum of the Riverina in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. And it just enabled me to get shots that had a little bit more, composition and that kind of stuff. Again, these are shots that I've just pulled from file. They haven't actually been color rendered or anything like that. There's some shots from Brazil. So we're going on around about 2007 here. So I've had the camera for a couple of years. I will just flick through this. This is just travels that I've done in 2007. So we can obviously see that with this camera, I can have a little bit more control over the settings and the composition and just the different lens sizes there. And we're coming Guggenheim and the Met. So we're coming back to New York and different, very different sort of capability with it. Even that little camera, which is not by any means a hugely professional camera, into Ireland, and I don't even know where that is, France somewhere, in Rome. Just skip through these shots back to Mozambique, but just gave me a lot more creative control over that. So we're coming forward through to about 2008 now. Again, this is straight out of the camera. This hasn't been rendered at all. And as you'll probably know, in 2008, Canon released the 5D Mark II, which for me, I think I picked it up the following year. So in 2009, I picked up the 5D. Actually, sorry, I think that's pictured the Mark III. That should be the Mark II there. So you're probably more familiar with that. And this is the next camera that I got. So this is the 5D Mark III, which I actually still own. But in 2009, my camera collection was, I still had the TRV 900, but I wasn't using that because I was using the 5D Mark II. And my two main lenses, right, I can come down here, were the 70-200. This is the version 3, I think, because my version 2 got stolen on a shoot. So this one got replaced by insurance. But essentially, this was like, these are my two original lenses that I had. So I had the 24-70 and 70-200 for many years, and I think I had a 50mm lens as well, which I then sold because I didn't like it. I didn't find it very reliable in terms of its focusing because it was just one of the cheapy ones. But this kind of was my lenses from 2000 and, what's that, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then in 2013, I sold the Mark II and I bought the 5D Mark III, which had some better video capabilities. And then I was, since then, I think I got rid of my video cameras and it's been all sort of DSLR work. And what else did I get? I got, okay, so I got in addition to that, a 16-35. These are all EF lenses. And I got the 100mm macro. Just gonna pop that one up there. I got the 2x extender just for this fella over here, just to make sure that we can get the range if we need it, even though we're gonna lose some light stops on there. And then in, what are we up to? I think around about 2016, 17, that kind of thing. That's where I was like, I need to get a whole bunch more primes. And I got this is my favorite lens is the 35 EF 1.4. So that was becoming a bit of a workhorse in terms of interviews and photojournalism and all that kind of stuff. And then in 2000 and, what are we up to? 2017, I think it was. I got that lens and the 5D Mark IV, which has been up until last year was my sort of main stills camera. And then I repurchased this 50mm lens, which is the STM version or something of that. That's right, STM. Yeah, 1.8. Partly just because I wanted a little lens to run around town with when it wasn't an actual job. I didn't want to have to carry this beast, because like this one certainly gets heavy over a period of time. So that's where the 5D Mark IV became my main photography camera and my sort of secondary video camera. As you probably know with these specs, the cripple hammer from Canon on this was that it would shoot 4K, but it was only motion JPEG, which was 8-bit, and it was a crop in on the sensor. So that meant you really had to use the wider lenses to get, like the 16 to 35 would give you closer to the 24 to 70 kind of range. And it was just like, it was a ton of data with this motion JPEG and probably not quite efficient in terms of the codec. So, you know, it's what it was for a couple of years, and then bringing in the next fella, which was the Canon C200, which for me was a good balance. This is what I'm talking about, between being able to use like the EF 35 prime lens on this EF mount. It meant that for corporate stuff, you've got the 8-bit codec, which holds up okay. Like, you know, ideally it would be 10-bit, but holds up okay. And then for commercials and that kind of stuff, we could actually shoot with the raw CFast card in there. So for 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 19, 20, 21. Okay, so for those years, that was kind of my solution of lenses that would sort of cover the bases of what I needed. And for video, this was great because you got the audio in. You don't need to do any sort of sync for that for some smaller jobs. You know, you can use proper like G4 wireless lavs and XLR mics, and you can get like top handles and actual things that are going to give you just better ergonomics, like this grip handle. And I have like whole like cages that I can build out for it. But there is a way in which smaller profile is actually quite nice. So, and then in around, I can't remember what it was, I have to look it up, but back in around 20, I'm going to say 18, 19, maybe, yeah, I think 2018 or 19 or something, Canon brought in the RF lens just as around I was purchasing all these primes. And I almost bought the EF 85 1.4 with the image stabilization because it looked like a really great lens. And then with the with the RF mount being introduced and that looking like the future of what Canon had, I was like, all right, let's just put all this on hold. I don't want to buy any more lenses because I want to work out what is going on with this RF lens mount, because it's potentially going to like change the game, because it works one way, but it doesn't work back the other way. So also what happened was this lens here, the 24 to 70, trusty old lens. This is my oldest one from 2009. A couple of years ago, the focus ring on that got, it still works for photography. It does like autofocus, but for manual work, it doesn't quite, at the edge, it sort of, it seems to be working now, but it's not very reliable. Like if I was trying to like pull focus manually, the ring would slip a bit. And I sent it into Canon for repair, and they said we would be happy to dispose of it for free for you. And I was like, hey, give that back, because it still works. So I needed to replace this lens. So in 2021, as in last year, I then bought the R5. And to replace this lens, I bought the 24 to 70, which is down here. And so this has the RF mount, which is a little bit chunkier. I think it's like plastic, whereas the other one's metal, so that doesn't seem as great. But otherwise, it seems like a very good and sharp lens, and it's got image stabilization in it and that kind of stuff. So that's really good for video work where you need to rely on the image stabilization a bit just to smooth out the shot. So I got the R5 camera, and then Canon announced the R5C, and I was like, well, that kind of works in terms of my hybrid workflow. So I returned the R5 because I was still within that window, fortunately, and but I held on to this RF lens for the 24-70, and then Canon, it's just been on back order for a long time. So that is where I now have this RF lens, which let's take some cameras down here because we're getting a bit crowded, which I can't actually use on the C200. Move this around a bit. Okay, I'm gonna put these cameras down here. So you can go from the, where are we? So I have this adapter, which is the, let's see if I can get a close up of this. Where are we? In here. So I have, this is the RF to EF mount here. So that will actually go on the front of a camera, but it won't go the other way around. All right, so we've got all our paraphernalia out here. So that sort of brings me to this like holding pattern where I was just like, I don't want to spend any more money on lenses until I work out what is my strategy here, because I think it's really good to try and cross-pollinate as much as you can and use gear that will last for a long time. Like audio gear is something that I will just buy once and it's great stuff and I will use it through until it falls apart. And so that brings me to about half an hour ago. Whoop, hang on a second. Stand that one upright. Put this down here. Oh, I got a ton of gear. Okay. Move that one aside. So yes, half an hour ago, B&H actually delivered my R5C. So I have it here. Yeah. It's a little box. I was surprised at how light it was to some degree, actually. I actually haven't opened it, so we can open it together and look at the future of hybrid filmmaking. Let's see if I can get a little top-down shot here. And there we go. All right, so we have the body. We have cardboard. And we have, what else we got? We have a strap, cable, a little cable holder thing, little battery, and a battery charger. So no surprises there. Let's chuck it down there. And ta-da. So as you can see, the R5 would have been, let me see if I can get a closer shot of that. Yeah, not too bad. All right. So the R5 would have been about this big, like this kind of thing. And then the R5C has this little chunky thing on the back there. But in terms of the hand, it seems very similar to hold. So not a bad little size. And yeah, nice red button. Obviously, we like the red. And then a big old exhaust fan going along here. And the advantage of this one is that it's got like time code in here, so we can sync it up for multi-camera. And the fan means that it can record continuously without stopping every 20 minutes. So that is the R5C, which is sort of the future of, I don't know. So this is my conundrum, which is now that this lens will fit on that. Let's just put that one on there. And all right, so now we have a sort of run and gun scenario, which has some image stabilization in it. So it has it in the lens, and it has sort of digital version in this, even if it doesn't have IBIS. And for photography, yeah, I think that'll still work. Feels kind of a little bit more like a sort of medium format camera with that chunky back on it. So interesting. But then that obviously brings me to what am I going to do with the C200? Because if I keep this camera, I can't actually, and if I start buying new lenses, like if I buy the prime versions of the RF, these lenses will not go back onto the C200. So there is my dilemma between those two that I have. So the other way I've been thinking about it, let me just check in here. See how we got on the comments. Everyone's good on the comments. Everything looks good. Cool. The other way of thinking about it is just putting amount on the R5C and sticking with the EF lenses. So, potentially maybe even like selling off this lens and just buying one of the older ones. And this brings me to another purchase, which is, there's a whole bunch of things happening over here. Actually, so I've got the battery grip, which I had before with the R5C, so that'll be what I'll be using for photography, but probably not for when the R5C is hooked up for video. I have the RS2, which has not even been unboxed here, but that is for gimbal work with the R5C. And then I've got these Kolari filters, which are drop-in. So these were $400 for a set of 3, as opposed to Canon sells them for about $400 for one, and then it's like another $140 for a clear one, and I think $300 for the circular polarizer. So let me see if I can get this out of here. So coming back over here, what do we got? I'm gonna go back to here, and all right, so in here we've got some filters, some paper, chuck everything away, and then I half suspect this one was already opened in B&H. This one down here. Okay, so this is an RF to EF mount, and it has a circular, a variable ND in this from 2 to 10. So that's where we can pop that in the R5C. Let me see if I can pull up this one from, if we go down here. All right, so we're gonna go this. All right, we get that off and match this one up. So essentially we have, let me see if I can go in close. Nope, let's go this side. Get in close on this camera here. So yes, we can pull the lens out like that, and you can see the shutter there, and I need to come over this way more, and then push that in like that, and we can do the variable ND. If I pull this out, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here, which is as I rotate it, it's going to get darker. Sorry, I'll try and get in the middle. Darker or lighter. So that gives me a whole filter that can go behind the lens rather than in front of it. So it doesn't matter about the thread size and all that kind of stuff. So that's a scenario where if I then stick with the EF mount lenses, obviously the lens that I've just bought here does not fit on that because it's an RF trying to go onto an EF mount. So that's where I gotta put that one aside. And we need to go back to maybe like a 1.4 35 mil. I'll just take this one off. Get this one on properly. There we go. All right, and then this one goes on like so. All right, so now we have our 35 with a ND filter, which is good if we're trying to get a shallow depth of field with this 1.4 lens, and that would work for photography and for video. Of course, with the R5C, it's actually got this power switch here, which is going to move you from one mode into another entirely. So it takes a couple of seconds for it to boot up across that. So you can't just like switch straight across. You've got to like put it into a different mode. But that is one way that I could, give me a second, come back to here. That is one way that I could go about with my lenses. I think a lot of guys with Komodos are doing this kind of thing where they'll essentially have an RF lens, and because there's no mirror in this anymore, so the EF had a shallower depth on the lens side and a deeper depth on the camera side because it needed room for that mirror to reflex. Now that these mirrorless cameras don't have a mirror, hence in the name mirrorless, that whole distance can be reduced. And so it means that space between lens and the sensor that can be used for these adapters now between RF and EF. So you can actually just stick with your EF glass and just sort of continue on as you would, as long as all your other cameras have EF. Sorry, as long as you don't have any like RF lenses that you're trying to put onto an EF mount. So that's mainly my thing that I'm trying to work out, which is like, what do I do with this 24-70 RF lens? Because I really do like it, and there's something nice about putting a lens natively onto the body rather than having an adapter. But equally so with the R5C not having any internal ND filters, this is a way to actually bring that into play. So that's what I've got in terms of these cameras and where I'm going with that. And as you can see, this sort of thing, as opposed to the C200, which this doesn't even have a lens on it, is going to be much lighter and much easier to balance on the gimbal once we get all that up and running. The main downside that I can see of the R5C is that if you ever wanted to record RAW, it won't actually do it won't send power to the lens because it doesn't have enough. It's got like a 7.2 volt batteries in these LPE6NH, and it actually needs about 9 volt, which can come through external power. So it means that you're going to have to like bulk this up into a rig if you want to get that going. So that's where I'm at with these lenses, and I guess like I've never actually switched over to Sony or anything like that because I guess I've just sort of bought into the Canon ecosystem and probably bought into the branding around the colors and that kind of stuff, and it just kind of, I've been happy with it. And the camera side, I think also when you learn a menu, there's something about like the shorthand that you get on a job where you know very quickly what you're doing and you're not searching for something. So I am excited about the R5C though, because it just has actual proper video in there. So it's got a whole range of different video settings, 10-bit and RAW, as well as compressed versions. And I need both. Like sometimes I want to shoot high quality stuff for bigger commercials, and then other times I'm shooting, I don't know, corporate stuff or event stuff where I just want to have high quality video that doesn't need to be raw and just sort of work faster with that. So that's my ecosystem at the moment. And then for stills, I've got the battery mount, which also would give some more juice because this will use up a lot of power. And yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's not too big. I was wondering about this sort of back end of this, but I think it's okay. It doesn't look too chunky. The R5 itself though does look quite good because it's a little bit smaller than the 5D Mark IV. So yeah, do you have any questions? Let me know if you've got any questions about what we're looking at here, and in terms of the concept behind that, and just like the lenses that we have in play here and why I've chosen them. But in terms of what's next for me, I'm still trying to work out particularly like what primes to buy now that I'm probably going down this like RF mount for bodies. And am I going to get RF lenses to match, or am I going to get EF lenses and use an adapter? Because I kind of want to just sell off my old EF lenses and get new ones because, I don't know, it's the latest and greatest. But there's also something to be said for having filters in the middle to be able to do variable NDs and that kind of stuff. So, yeah. All right. That is, don't have any questions. So I will probably just wrap up here, but that's what I had for this week. Just introducing you to the R5C in my workflow. I'm also wondering with live streaming, because this actually has a USB-C port on the side which can power it and I believe can charge the batteries from it. I want to test out, I don't know if it will, but I want to test out if that USB-C connection straight into a laptop would be enough to power it and do sort of webcam mode to bring in for live streams. Could be interesting to see if we get that up and running, but I'll see. I'll have a play around with it and see what I've got going on here. Yeah. All right, we do have one question. Two questions. Let me see here. Peter is joining from Kentucky, and he says he recently got his first R series camera and 2 lenses and ended up selling his EF mount camera and 3 lenses. Seems like a good move. I think once you start getting into the RF lenses, it's going to be frustrating when you can't use a lens on a camera body. For example, if I stick with a C200 and I then have this, brand new 24-70 really great lens, and I want to use that on the C200 and I can't, I think that's going to be frustrating because I want everything to fit onto everything, because this goes back to what I was saying about traveling and packing light and making sure that things can do multiple things. Rather than, I've never actually bought Cineglass because I think I would rather rent that. And when I'm doing those sort of jobs, I'm putting together a bigger crew and I can't operate that on my own. So for myself, these lenses have been the ones that have kept me for just really small things, if doing a little corporate interview. And then for the bigger things where I'm producing and directing, I'm hiring people and I'm using their gear and their, Reds and Alexas and actual proper glass for cine stuff. Jules says, is there any way to go live from Facebook or YouTube straight from one's smartphone using the Filmic Pro app without using an ATEM, Yellow Box, or a computer? Pro app. I'm not sure. Maybe. I think Filmic Pro is more recording locally and outputting via the HDMI. I don't think it has any NDI capacity. So there are other apps which would do NDI, and then you could use NDI on your computer to pull that in as a webcam if you want to sort of push that out via the computer. But the other way would be just getting a HDMI to USB converter if you want to pull that in, because Filmic Pro does work well in terms of the I've got one permanently set up here just with this camera. Let me see if I got plug in the phone. And I'll cut to number 3. Where are we? Okay, so this is my phone, and then Filmic Pro. Load that up, and this is where I'm going straight out of Filmic Pro into this this cable, which is just an extension cable, and that's going over the back of the desk into an adapter, which is giving power into this so that I can keep this charged while it's running, and also video. So that's where under settings, I don't think there is. Yeah, I think you're basically going to be either saving to the camera like we got here. Actually, sorry, you can't see that because I'm doing a clean feed out. Let me see if I can't find that. At the moment, I've got a clean feed out on this. But essentially, yeah, that's what you would have to do, is treat it like a HDMI connection. Yeah, I mean, the advantage of Filmic Pro is that you're going to get a lot more manual control over the image. Whereas if you use something like the NDI app, it's going to be a bit more like auto settings for the camera, even though you get the advantage of the NDI going into the computer. So yeah, have a play around with it and see if you find an easy way to do it. I've always gone wired for the phone and all this kind of stuff, just because it's faster and more reliable. Like I plug it in and it works. Obviously, you're sort of limited to the length of your cable, so if you're trying to run off around the studio, it's harder to do that kind of stuff. But for what I'm doing at the desk, I found it to be more reliable, and as you saw there, I can just like plug it in. Like I hadn't set that up. It's just something that has been sitting around there from other weeks. Whereas wireless connections always, finicky. They kind of drop out and that kind of stuff. So, Peter wants to know if we've got any experience using C-series cameras for live streaming. For sure, yeah. I mean, we use a lot of C300 and 500, and if I'm doing like a multicam, that's where I'll try and camera match across that. But that's more either like SDI or HDMI, and bring that into an ATEM for live streaming in that regard. So you probably could use like different Canon cameras, and the advantage of keeping within the Canon family is you're going to get a sort of similar look, even though it's a little bit different. But yeah, I've used C300s a lot. They're kind of really good for event work or multi-camera type scenarios, because they're a good price point for renting, and a lot of operators know how to use them. So it's pretty easy to put together a crew and do a live streaming with a C300, and there's it's EF glass, so there's like tons of things available, which is good, at least with these newer cameras being the RF mount. At least you can put an adapter on it, for $100 or for $400 for these ones with the filters, and it just gives you access to all of the other lenses that you would have otherwise. All right, question here. Do you live stream directly from the ATEM Mini or go to the computer and then go live? So the way that I've got this hooked up is in, let me see if I got a few things I can show. Where are we on to? Trying to work out what I got plugged in here. On PTZ2. Okay, so if I go to, let's cut across to that. This is my PTZ2 camera. This is my rack over here. So within this rack, which I've shown on previous episodes, is the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, which so I think in the next 3 weeks, work is going to calm down a bit and I'll have time to actually finish this. But for the moment, it's been a little bit nuts. So this project is kind of half built, and a lot of this stuff is just sort of sitting on top. Hence the bit of the nest that's going on there. But I do have all the pieces, and that will be screwed together soon. And my multi-view is above that. There's a boom in the way, so apologies about that. But essentially, I've got the cameras 1 and 2, which are the PTZ cameras, coming in there. I've got my iPhone in 3, nothing in 4. I've got two computer inputs on for 5 and 6, nothing in 7, and then I've got the Raspberry Pi, which is pulling up this comment, as you can see in the green screen. It's been then chroma keyed out. So that is all happening in the ATEM, and then that is then going out to YouTube via the ATEM directly. So I'm not actually coming through the computer, which generally I've thought has been more reliable than putting all that pressure on the computer, although it's not to say that the ATEM is without fault, because if you saw last week's show, I had some sort of streaming buffering or something going on there with the ATEM, which I didn't quite figure out. Although, like, the main problem there was I actually just forgot to hit start on the stream because I was doing other things. So it's always good to have a sort of set up for your show where you're like you're having a checklist and you're doing sort of things. And I was watching the stream coming into YouTube, and I forgot that I actually needed to hit the button to go live. So that was part of the problem. And then when I tried to self-correct that, I think there was some buffering issues. So it's not to say that the ATEM going out to line directly is ever going to be foolproof, because there's things that can go wrong. But I think as a matter of course, it is better to have hardware encoders that are sending stuff out to the internet rather than computers where the CPU load can vary depending on the apps that you've got going on, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Thanks for all these questions, guys. Lucas from Germany here is wondering if I've ever tried Blackmagic cameras. I Not very much. Like I've used them on a couple of shoots, and I've got a number of camera guys who own them and operate them. And sometimes when I hire them, they'll use their cameras, so it'll sort of be in play in terms of what we shoot. I almost bought the 6K Pro a little while back. I was sort of interested in how it would tie in with the ATEM, but I'm glad I didn't, because I just I do really like Canon in terms of its stills and the video. And as you can see, like with the R5C, like that is going to be, there's going to be a workhorse for both stills and video. And well, video to some degree. I'm not entirely sure about the video, but I am thinking about buying a second one of these, because normally I've had 2 DSLRs for that kind of work, which at the moment has been well, it was the R5 until I got rid of that, but then prior to that it was the 5D Mark IV and the 5D Mark III, and I've almost sold them off, but I have been waiting for this camera to get in. As I said, it got in like an hour ago, so I haven't even switched it on yet. But the R5C is interesting because it's got, like you'll see on the top here, I don't know if you can zoom right in here. Let me see if I can get in right in close. There we go. It's actually got in the hot shoe here, it's got smart connectors. So there is an XLR module that you can add on top of this to get audio in. So that's where it's sort of, I don't know, it technically bridges the gap. And the downside of this is going to be like, what do you do with power? Because the LPE6 batteries are not going to cut it. I do have V-mount batteries with an adapter, so I can certainly rig up something and have all-day power through that in a battery form. And then, but it does, then you're starting to add to the whole bulk of it and the complexity of the rig. So, yeah, it's almost like if there was a way to have an R5C that would take, I don't know, the BPA 60 batteries, those ones, because they're great. They go for a long day. Or I guess I could use the battery grip, which I'm not a huge fan of using 2 LPE6 NH, whatever they are, batteries. So yeah, so that's, I think particularly come back to a question about like, have I tried Blackmagic cameras? Part of the reason has been that from a stills point of view, they don't have stills. I'm going to say they don't have stills. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they don't have stills. If they do have it, it's certainly not what I would use for a client job. And so this sort of camera will carry me across photography and video. Yeah, so that said, they are, like, the fact that they can shoot RAW does make them quite flexible, because I've found with productions that we've done around the world, actually, there's actually quite a few people that have Blackmagic cameras. And so when you're trying to camera match across different shoots, like I'm doing a shoot at the moment, which has been shooting in Saudi Arabia and India and UK and Brazil and all these different places. And so not everyone has the same cameras, and we've been trying to use Red and Alexas as much as possible. But then there's some vendors that just, they have a Blackmagic, and it's been workable. Like, we can use that footage to color grade and sort of match it to some degree. So I would say for the price point, they are really neat cameras. I do find them a little, I don't love the DSLR form factor for shooting video. I don't think it's ideal. So that's where I'm not completely sold on getting rid of the C200, because this sort of DSLR mirrorless form factor certainly has its limitations when you're trying to do longer shoots or like bigger rigs. I just not totally in with that. Any last minute questions about cameras, about mounts? What are you guys shooting on? Are you shooting Blackmagic? I know that a lot of people on this channel are doing live streaming, that kind of stuff. So, like, what are you using for your live streaming cameras? Are you bringing in via sort of HDMI into the ATEM with the Blackmagic cameras, or are you going, Sony, Panasonic, Canon, that kind of route, and then just sort of bringing it in over SDI or HDMI? So let me know. Be curious to hear what sort of cameras you're working with and how that goes from a live streaming perspective. I do want to do at some point, probably in a couple of weeks when I get a bit more time back, because as I said, it's been pretty nuts recently, is a look at the PTZ cameras. So even with my PTZ cameras, I've stuck with the Canon cameras, and I've been, yeah, I think I've been pretty happy with the color quality. I mean, what you're looking at here is a Canon CRN 300 PTZ camera. So with the right lighting and like with enough light and setting the gain floor at 0, I think you can get a pretty clean image out of it, even though it's a smaller sensor, so it's not, you know, it's not like beautiful depth of field on this kind of thing. But the advantage is that this camera it can be on all day, and I'm not worrying about like sort of burning out a sensor when it doesn't need to be on. And also the robotics part of the pan, tilt, and zoom means that I can recall things here and sort of set up shots and scenes, so I can, you know, give you an insert shot like we had before. I can show you sort of finer details without a camera operator. So from a live stream point of view, I think PTZ cameras are a really nice addition to the workflow. Like my which is probably another good thing to talk about, which is for live streaming. So like I've got what do I do? Like a lot of commercials. I'm doing more like one camera normally. If it's like corporate or brand story type things, it might be a two camera interview, which is where I've up until now I've been shooting with a C200, and then a 5D Mark IV is the B cam, which I've, as I said, with the motion JPEG, I've not liked that at all, but it's just kind of been handy. So I'm very pleased to get the R5C to replace that as a B cam. And I think when it comes to live streaming, putting together a live stream, the PTZ cameras are really great from establishing wide shots, maybe a little bit of movement. You can sort of track into things, and sort of recalling top-down shots. They're really good as well. And then I would add in camera operators with proper cameras with a zoom lens, to be following a speaker or something like that, depending on what the shoot is, what the content is, you know, like how far other people are away, or is it like a smaller sort of brand chat. So I think there is room for the PTZ cameras to play alongside more traditional cameras, and lenses that can have zooming functionality on it, so you can get a smooth zoom in and out rather than not this one, but like, you know what I mean, the DSLR lenses or the photography lenses, which you know, aren't really designed for video. They're more designed for photography, but then we get the benefit of being able to use them on a sort of video camera type thing. Jules is using his Sony DSLR with a couple of iPhones, which is great. I've actually found, like last year I was using the Filmic Pro a lot, particularly for top-down shots, when I was shooting back at the apartment, and I had trying to rig something in a way that's not too big, because, you know, to mount even something like this top-down requires, you know, a decent amount of C-stands and crossbars, and then like getting up there and sort of positioning it to get the right spot. So that's where using an iPhone actually found gave me a top-down shot, which you'll see in some of my earlier YouTube videos, and that kind of stuff's pretty, I mean, it's this kind of thing, right? Like, so at the moment I've got this PTZ camera, which is essentially replacing my iPhone for the top-down shot here as we pull out these things. These are the Colari lenses, actually. So this is the circular polarizer we've got in there. I do wish they were smaller. I feel like we don't need all this extra space around it. That's probably my main gripe with them so far from what I've seen. But, you know, that the iPhone would be able to pull up this kind of shot quite nicely, and then it's a lot lighter for, oh, they're very magnetic. They're kind of sticking together. Yeah, so iPhones definitely have their place and that kind of thing. So Jules also says back in the 70s he owned his very first black and white reel-to-reel recorder. Apologies for the pie there, putting a percentage sign in there. So I'm a big Sony fan since then. I used to use Sony. I mean, like, I started this whole thing saying like my very first camera was a Sony TRV 900. So it's certainly something that I think Sony makes great stuff, and I would recommend Sony to anyone. I think it is really, it's a great company, makes great cameras. I've just probably from the photography standpoint really got deep into the 5D Mark II and very familiar with shooting Canon. So that's where along the video side, they've sort of merged together. But yes, going back to my my TRV 900, I love this camcorder. I don't think I actually have it anymore. My parents, I made some comment to my parents about, because it was in a box back at their house in Australia, and I made some comment about like, it's amazing that all these DV tapes, and this camera was in this box with all these DV tapes, can now fit onto this single hard drive. And I hadn't actually finished transcoding all of my footage onto hard drive, like, because it had to ingest it all, and like this camera was starting to chew the tape and that kind of stuff. So from archiving point of view, it's less than ideal to have DV tape. And I'd probably done, I don't know if I had 200 or 400, I'd probably around about that many DV tapes, and I was halfway through it. And then I found out several weeks later that my parents had actually, they thought I had said like, oh, I don't need this anymore. And so they hadn't just thrown it out, they'd like given it to a secondhand store. And then I was like, you did what? And they went and raced down to Trent. Dad was like, I felt so sick. But so someone had actually bought half my DV tapes at this like thrift store. I don't know what they're doing with all of my archives of video. And then there was still one box of DV tapes. So I was able to recover half of my collection from, we're talking 2001 or 2002 to 2007, I think, was it like when I did a lot of that sort of DV stuff. But, again, Sony cameras are very good. So I would recommend that, and I'm not saying Canon is by any means the only one to do there. Josh Hamilton, he says that we use Blackmagic cameras with HDMI coming into the ATEM, wanting to get a PTZ camera for a second angle. I highly recommend PTZs. They're so much fun. As I've been saying continually on this channel, I think depending on what you're doing, but particularly for what I'm doing here each week as a one-man band live stream about live streaming, it just it makes it so much faster because from my control panel, like from the Stream Deck, that's where I can program all the shots, recall them, and then put them into a sequence so that you get all this sort of stuff happening on the fly. So definitely get a PTZ camera. I think there are a few that came out after NAB. The Canon one is good. I actually bought it secondhand from B&H. B&H has a secondhand section that every now and then they seem to come up. I guess people try PTZ cameras and then they're not for everyone because they're very much not a traditional camera that you can kind of shoot and record. It's a streaming camera. It's sending out a signal and you need to either capture that and record that on some device or else you're live streaming that only. So if you are looking for a Canon PTZ camera, I would recommend just keeping an eye on like B&H's secondhand segment, and you can get, I think I got these two for like 20% off. I just figured like, given that I'm not, this is not a commercial quality to me, so I figured a secondhand would be fine for that. And then for my other cameras where I'm doing like really sort of detailed client jobs, that's where I want to get sort of brand new glass, just because it's also nice having good gear and new gear. So that's about it, guys. Any other last minute comments that pop up here before we wrap up? I know we've got about 5 minutes left on this show. The other thing is I guess if we talk about lenses, I guess we could also talk about batteries and media cards, because the more cameras you get, the more types of batteries you need, which means more battery charges, which means that if you've got one camera that you've used heavily and you've used up the batteries and you're trying to use another camera and like you can't sort of switch over batteries. So that's where the LPE6 batteries for these ones have been good for stills and video, because I now have like a ton of those batteries, which is also has its downsides when you have to charge that. And then the other frustrating thing has been, which I guess is just the nature of it, but like over the years, Canon has gone from compact flash to CFast to CF Express with these cameras. I mean, it's good that these speeds are getting much faster. We're now up to, I think it's something like 1200 megabytes per second write speed, and where is it? Over here. Got a couple of new ones of these. Yeah, 1400 megabyte write speed. I don't know if that's sustained or if that's just the peak, and 1700 read, which if you're going to be shooting 512 gig, just like you're throwing it away, you certainly need to be able to read it that fast. Otherwise, the other side is like when you finish a shoot, you're spending the whole evening kind of offloading. So bigger cameras, or bigger resolution cameras and faster cards means more data, which is more data to manage, more processing time. So these are like, the back end of things that we've got to manage. And so that's where I think what I'm keeping my eye out for is Canon bringing out, because I've never been a huge fan of the C70. It just feels too much like a DSLR, and I think I'd rather just have a DSLR. So is there a sort of C300, C500 with an RF mount that would just, for me, mean that I could have two of these R5Cs, so that when I'm shooting photography, I can have two cameras in play. And that could also be a B and a C camera for interviews or that kind of stuff. And then for my primary video camera, some sort of like RF mount, Canon C300 or C500. I think that kind of thing would interest me, just so that I have these lenses that I would then, because, this was like 2,400, I think, something like that. And, each of these lenses are $2,500 to $3,000. So if we're going to go buy, a 35 prime, a 50 prime, 85 prime, I don't even have a 24 yet. You're very easily going to drop $10,000 on that. And I would like to know that I can use them for video and for photography, partly from the cost point of view, but also just like managing stuff. Like I have, a small studio here, and I don't want to be like crawling over gear and boxes and that kind of stuff. So that's my thought around that. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me this week as we talk Canon cameras. I'll be back next week with, not sure yet. Not sure what the topic will be, but it could be PTZs if I get around to that. I need a bit more time to program some of that. I'm still working on updating the companion profile with H2R updates and all that kind of stuff. So it's just been a very, very intense work month, and I am sort of getting through that and trying to finish off the rack and all that kind of stuff. But always, thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful week. And I will see you next week. Bye.